Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Amanda Zerby. I'm a clinical supervising attorney with the Stanford Environmental Law Clinic and a lecturer in law. It is a true pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar on confined animal facility permitting and reporting under the Porter-Cologne Act, and to introduce Zoe Robertson, who's a third-year student here at SLS and who has been working on these issues for almost 2 years now. Zoe has done a phenomenal amount of research to understand the water quality permitting and reporting regime for confined animal facilities in California, and we are incredibly excited to share the results of that research with you all today. Zoe will present her work for about 20 minutes, and then we'll turn to Q&A and take some questions from you all. Just quickly before we dive into substance, I'd just like to highlight that the views expressed during this webinar are those of the authors and not necessarily those of Stanford Law School or the Environmental and Natural Resources Law and Policy Program. In addition, I'd like to thank a few individuals who contributed greatly to the production of this report, including our co-authors, Evan Lehman, who is another third-year law student here and an alum of the Environmental Law Clinic, as well as Professor Deborah Sivas and Avery Bick. In addition, I'd like to thank the team at the Climate and Energy Policy Program, who have been our close collaborators in producing this work. And finally, I just want to acknowledge that many students have contributed to this work through Policy Lab courses and other projects during their time here, and just to thank all of them for their contributions. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Zoe to talk through our primary findings in this report and our recommendations. Take it away, Zoe.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda, for that introduction, and thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. As Amanda explained, I'll be discussing a white paper recently released by the Environmental and Natural Resources Law and Policy Program in collaboration with the Climate and Energy Policy Program. The paper details California's failure to adequately monitor and oversee confined animal facilities, known as CAFs, under California's water quality scheme. The findings in this report aren't purely academic. As all Californians know, the state is either in a drought or on the precipice of drought. Preserving access to clean water is understandably an area of public concern. So our finding that the whereabouts of significant quantities of manure in the state are unknown and therefore may be entering the water supply generated some media coverage. SF Gate, for instance, covered our white paper with an article titled, "Study Finds Huge Problem with California Farms Missing Manure." To explain how we reached our findings, I'll begin by providing background on confined animal facilities in California, as well as the regulatory entities responsible for monitoring them. Then I'll briefly describe our methodology before transitioning to our results. I'll discuss, in broad strokes, the problems we identified with data collection, CAF compliance with existing regulatory requirements, and agencies' enforcement of key water quality regulations. I'll conclude by providing some recommendations. So let's now turn to the scientific background. Cows produce tons, and I mean literal tons of manure each year. According to the USDA, one cow produces roughly 20 tons of manure annually. This means that a single mega dairy of 3,000 cows can produce 120 million pounds of manure in 1 year. According to some estimates, this manure output is similar to the human waste produced annually by the city of San Francisco. So one 3,000 cow dairy can have similar waste output to small cities. And California has more dairies than any other state in the country, boasting over 1.7 million cows. Calves are distributed unequally across the state. The vast majority of calves are located in the Central Valley, which is the middle ridge of the state in between Sacramento and Fresno. And they're also located in the southernmost tip of the state in the Imperial Valley. Calves aren't always so concentrated in these locations. From the 1970s to the 1990s, the dairy shifted from northern portions of the state more towards the south in pursuit of abundant cropland and groundwater. The Central Valley, a region of the state with high concentrations of low-income communities of color, now bears the primary burden of calves and their associated pollution. The way that the state manages its millions of tons of manure each year can subsequently have profound deleterious effects on water quality. To understand the effects of this manure on the environment, we first have to understand how farms manage their manure. Dairies most often consist of animal pens and surrounding croplands. So the surrounding croplands are used to grow feed for the animals. If you look at the picture on the slide, you can see the brown dirt patches where the animals reside, and then the green patches where the crops are grown. These croplands provide a convenient site of manure disposal. This manure, which contains nitrogen and other chemical components necessary for plant growth, can act as fertilizer for the crops when spread onto the fields. But a key problem arises when manure is overapplied to fields. Applying manure at a rate beyond what crops can sustainably uptake can lead to two problems. So first, when it rains, this excess manure from crop fields can run off to surface waters. This result is problematic because manure's chemical components, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus, can wreak havoc on ecosystems. 1 pound of phosphorus and 5 pounds of nitrogen can lead to the growth of over 500 pounds of algal blooms. These algal blooms deprive aquatic ecosystems of oxygen and can lead to fish kills. And beyond its chemical components, manure contains other harmful constituents. For example, manure contains a variety of hormones. While some of these hormones arise naturally, others are artificial, administered to the animals specifically to increase their growth rates or milk production. Exposure to or ingestion of these hormones can disrupt normal hormonal signaling and affected humans and animals. Manure also contains antibiotic-resistant bacteria. To keep animals alive in dirty, crowded conditions, calf operators lace animal feed with low doses of antibiotics to prevent infection. But the overuse of antibiotics, especially at low doses over long periods of time, creates a breeding ground for antibiotic-resistant strains. Some antibiotic-resistant infections in humans are thought to be the consequence of calf manure runoff. So, manure runoff poses significant threats to animal and human health because of the chemicals it contains, the hormones it contains, as well as the antibiotic resistant bacteria it contains. Second, manure's chemical components can leach into groundwater. Of particular concern here is nitrogen. Consuming water contaminated with nitrogen can lead to severe human health effects. One such condition is methemoglobinemia, colloquially known as blue baby syndrome. The condition occurs when nitrogen interferes with hemoglobin's ability to bind oxygen, which subsequently deprives blood cells of their ability to carry oxygen throughout the body. The effects of blue baby syndrome are really serious. If not adequately treated, the condition can result in seizures, developmental delays, or death. High nitrate concentrations are also affiliated with increased risks for certain types of cancers and developmental delays. Problematically, many communities in the Central Valley rely on groundwater for drinking water and other sorts of household needs. As acknowledged by the State Water Board, which will be discussed more in a moment, many rural households, quote, are plagued with nitrate contaminated water, resulting in severe health, economic, and quality of life impacts. Regulating manure, and particularly manure land application, is thus a pressing problem in the state of California to preserve groundwater quality. So that begs the question, who's regulating calves in California? Calves are regulated by the State Water Board alongside 9 semi-autonomous regional boards. Each regional board is responsible for establishing water quality objectives and water quality control plans. These water quality control plans, once approved by the state board, provide the foundation for any further water and waste management policies within the region. From there, the regional boards set limits on individual facilities in their regions, including CAFs, through waste discharge requirements. These waste discharging requirements incorporate both state and regional level requirements. This is a complicated regulatory scheme, but the takeaway message is that the system allows for a lot of regional level a lot of regional level variation within ultimate state board control. Regional boards track compliance with waste discharge requirements through CAF self-reporting and annual reports. So annual reports from CAFs written by CAFs are the currency of compliance and the way that we determine what's happening with our water. So annual reports are sort of the key metric for compliance in the state. To investigate how CAFs complied with the requirements embedded in waste discharge requirements, we examined annual reports from the 5 regional boards with significant calf populations. The way that we determined which regions had the largest calf populations was by using SIX, which is the California Integrated Water Quality Systems website. SIX logs information about sites of environmental interest in California, including data about calf size and distribution across the state. 6 also tracks data on waterborne enforcement, which I'll discuss a little more later on. So we collected reports from 2023 and 2024 for our analysis. The variability in the number of reports we received depended in part on the nature of our requests, which changed somewhat over time, but also regional boards' receptivity to our requests. Region 1, for example, stores their annual reports at an on-site database. Their representative stated that they were unable to provide us with their universe of reports unless we drove to their office in Northern California. We didn't have the bandwidth to do that, and we presume that many other interested parties in the state might similarly lack the bandwidth to do so. Our findings reveal 3 key problems with state water quality regulatory scheme. So first, regional boards collect insufficient data to adequately track manure. Second, CAFs often do not comply with existing data reporting requirements. Third, it's unclear whether regional boards act on evidence that CAFs are not properly managing their waste. We can refer to these issues as collection, compliance, and enforcement, respectively. So the first issue is that regional boards collect insufficient data from CAFs to determine whether the facilities are complying with the state's water quality goals. As described earlier, manure and its chemical components can have adverse impacts on the environment. Understanding how much manure is created and how this manure is managed are thus prerequisites to gauging CAF compliance with water quality regulations. On the slide, I included a table from the white paper which summarizes the existing annual reporting requirements imposed by different regional boards. Let's look at the manure production reporting column. Our analysis revealed that 2 of the 5 regions in California with significant calf populations do not require calves to report the amount of manure that they produce annually. So said differently, these annual reports do not include a total annual manure production value. This is really problematic because manure production is the starting point by which regional boards and the public writ large can independently assess the effects of calves on surrounding environments. Without this value, Californians must rely on CAF's attestations alone that they're responsibly managing their manure. This exclusion also struck us as particularly odd because the state water quality regulations seem to require CAFs to report manure production. And the annual reports obviously differ in substance for the reasons that we just described, but they also differ in form. Region 5 reports, which include manure production data, tend to be fairly granular and machine readable. We can see that this Region 5 report includes a lot of data on the different categories of animals that are used for dairy production. In contrast, the Region 2 reports provide little specificity and are handwritten. This distinction, 1, makes it hard to conduct an apples-to-apples assessment of these reports across regions, and 2, makes it really hard to automate that process. So now let's look at our findings regarding CAF nutrient content reporting. Nutrient content reporting refers to whether CAFs track the life cycle of manure nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, at their facilities. This nitrogen field application data is critical to ascertaining the likelihood of groundwater contamination. If calves apply nitrogen above crop's uptake rate, then it's likely that the excess nitrogen will leach into groundwater. But only one regional board, Region 5, requires calves to engage in nutrient accounting to track the precise amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus that they're applying to their fields. The remaining 4 regional boards are left entirely in the dark on this data. I do want to make a caveat here. So while I'm holding up Region 5 as an example of thorough data collection, I want to make clear that the data analysis used in the region is nonetheless flawed. Specifically, the data rests on several flawed presumptions, one of which is that fields, prior to manure land applications, do not contain any nutrients. Let me explain. So this slide shows the summary page of a typical Region 5 report. In the highlighted portion, we can see that the overall ratio of applied to removed nitrogen is provided. CAFs calculate this value by dividing the total nutrients applied number by actual crop nutrient removal. This facility, bar none dairy, reported an applied to removed ratio of 1.23 in 2023. This means that they claim that they're applying nitrogen to their crops at a slight surplus. But let's take a closer look at what's really happening here. So The annual report for this facility and for all facilities in Region 5 presumes that their croplands had zero existing nitrogen content prior to applying manure. This doesn't make sense biologically. All soil contains some nitrogen and some phosphorus. And presuming that the soil doesn't have any nitrogen is particularly problematic because we know from reviewing 2023 and 2024 annual reports that CAFs report year after year nitrogen surpluses. So on this slide, I placed Bar Nuns Dairies 2023 annual report next to their 2024 report. In their 2023 report, we can see that the CAF reports an overall nutrient surplus of 68,485 pounds of nitrogen. But when we look at the top of their 2024 report, we see that the CAF reports that their existing soil nutrient content at the start of the year is zero. The question is where that 68,000 pounds of nitrogen went. If a CAF reports a nitrogen surplus in 2023, it's unreasonable to assume that in 2024, its soil has no nitrogen. So, in other words, CAFs do not account for rolling nitrogen across years, flouting biological reality. And I want to make this clear. This phenomenon is not unique to this dairy. All reports from Region 5 have the same problem. As a result, the annual report scheme of calculating applied to removed ratios is inaccurate. It's likely that the CAFs are creating larger surpluses of nitrogen than the reports suggest, which increases the probability of groundwater contamination down the line. And so, a sincere thanks for allowing me to indulge in that foray into soil nitrogen levels. As convoluted as these details are, the bottom line is simple. Regional boards often do not collect enough data to fully understand what manure runoff and leaching is doing to communities and ecosystems. Now we can move on to the next finding. CAFs often fail to comply with existing reporting requirements, however minimal these reporting requirements might be. So, in particular, we found that CAFs, when they're required to report manure production, often did so in ways that meaningfully departed from scientific estimates. For example, let's take a look at a report from Region 7. Region 7 is located in Southern California. And so whereas the Central Valley is home to dairies, Southern California is primarily home to feedlots. And so these are locations where animals are raised for meat rather than for milk. Feedlot cattle, importantly, produce less manure annually than milked cows. They average around 10 tons per year per animal. What we see on this slide is an annual report claiming that 4,505 cattle produced 211.5 tons of manure in 2023. This annual report implies that the CAF's animals produce 0.05 tons of manure annually each. This value is 1/200th of the rate suggested by the literature. This magnitude of deviation from the literature is somewhat unusual, but it was fairly common for CAFs to report producing manure values at far below literature rates. So they were saying that their cows, or rather their feedlot cattle, were producing 1, 2, or 5 tons of manure each year. Because CAFs only need to manage the manure that they attest to producing, underreporting manure production decreases management obligations as well as, of course, compromising transparency and public accountability. Now we can move on to our third and related problem of enforcement. There's little available evidence that the regional boards are following up on problems documented in CAF's annual reports. So we reached this finding after examining SIX. And as a reminder, that's that database that logs information about sites of environmental interest in the state, including CAFs. Pursuant to waste discharge requirements, regional boards are expected to examine CAF annual reports. After finding irregularities or other problems, the regional boards are required to log the actions they took to remedy those problems in SIX. This slide shows an example of the SIX page for Region 5 dairy. We can see that the waste discharge requirement to which the facility is subject is available at the top. That's that R5 2007 document. And at the bottom of the page, there's a history of enforcement actions. In our analysis, we found that some regions reported zero violations across all regulated CAFs, despite evidence of problematic conduct in annual reports. So Region 7, for example, reported zero violations or enforcement actions in SIX across the last several years. As a reminder, Region 7 is home to the feedlot that reports that its 4,000 cattle produced only 211 tons of manure in 2023. We would have expected to see some evidence in 6 that the regional boards took enforcement action against a calf whose reporting departed so significantly from the scientific literature. Or take another example from Region 2. Under the Region 2 waste discharge requirement, calves are required to test their on-site wells for fecal coliform bacteria. The approved rate of coliform bacteria is easy to remember. It's 1, so 1.1 colony forming units per 100 milliliters. The dairy on the slide reported that it had over 300 colony forming units per 100 milliliters, which is 300 times the approved rate. And again, from looking at 6, there's no evidence that the regional boards took any action to follow up on this concerning annual report relating to bacteria. So, in brief, annual reports provide valuable information on calf compliance with state water quality objectives. But if the regional boards aren't engaging with, let alone acting on, the content of the reports, they're ultimately of little use. And although there are genuinely few activities I enjoy more than discussing problems with calf regulation, you can ask my friends who are on this call. I want to use my remaining time to discuss some proposed solutions and next steps. So the first and most obvious solution is standardizing reporting requirements across regions. While Region 5's data collection is flawed for the reasons we discussed earlier, Region 5 nonetheless far outpaces other regions in data collection. They include information on manure production and nutrient content reporting. We also would encourage other regional boards to match Region 5's annual formatting. Their reports are largely typed and machine readable, which makes scraping and analyzing them easier for the public and for internal staff members. Next, monitoring the annual reports of thousands of calves is highly taxing for the boards. Each regional board consists of 7 part-time members. One way to improve monitoring is to make the reports proactively publicly available. While the annual reports are ostensibly publicly available now, we had to send email requests to each regional board for the reports, and some of them required us to come in person to receive the full lot. Asking regional boards to post these annual reports on receipt would bypass this time-consuming process to the benefit of all involved. Another way to more directly improve monitoring and enforcement is by enhancing the capacity of the regional boards themselves. California's water law fortunately provides a mechanism that the state board can use to increase regional board funding. Specifically, the Porter-Cologne Water Quality Control Act allows the state board to levy fees against CAFs, proportional to the size of the facility, to provide additional funding for regional boards. With this increased funding, the water boards could hire more staff. Our view is that the regional boards could benefit from 2 additional staff members in particular, a data scientist and then a groundwater administrator. A full-time data scientist could replicate the techniques that we used in the white paper to amalgamate data, which would provide a more efficient mode of compliance assessment amongst CAFs. And a groundwater administrator could conduct the necessary groundwater testing to track changes in nitrogen concentrations over time and protect local communities from consuming dangerous groundwater. I'll conclude now on a tentatively hopeful note. We didn't write this white paper because we had a burning passion for reading thousands of CAF annual reports. We wrote it to better understand what level of CAF regulation is happening on the ground in light of the fact that the state board is currently revising a dairy order with statewide precedential effect. And this dairy order was especially undertaken with the goal of correcting deficits in current reporting. We're hopeful that our findings can inform and support that process and ultimately lead to a more transparent and effective regulatory regime. If you're interested in learning more, we encourage you to visit the Environmental and Natural Resources Law and Policy Program website to read the full report. And that report also further explains our methodology, includes all of the literature and reports supporting the conclusions that we reached today. You can also visit Stanford's Animal Agriculture Dashboard, which is a fantastic resource that was put together by our data scientist, Avery Bick. The dashboard allows you to visualize all of the CAFs in the state, as well as the report's empirical findings. So if you've been desperate to see the applied to removed nitrogen ratios for all of the CAFs in Central Valley, you can do that there. Thank you so much for coming today. I would love to answer any questions that you have. Amanda Zerby, our clinical supervising attorney, will pose a few of the questions that have come up in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them. Thank you again.
Great. Thank you, Zoe. With that, we'll go ahead and turn to some questions. So while you're thinking of your questions and popping them in the Q&A box, go ahead and submit them if they're coming up for you. I'd like to quickly first invoke my prerogative as moderator and ask Zoe one of my own questions. So I know you did a considerable amount of work to look not only at permitting and reporting of manure that's generated by confined animal facilities, but also the wastewater that these facilities generate. And would you mind just talking a little bit about your findings on that as well, and anything in particular that stands out about how that wastewater is reported and managed?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for some context, wastewater is any water that comes into contact with manure. So, it's most often water that's used to wash pens or stalls or equipment on dairy farms. But processed wastewater can also be produced from the initial stages of dairy production. And because this water comes in contact with manure, it contains many of the same harmful components like nitrogen, phosphorus, antibiotic resistant bacteria that manure does. And we found that by and large, calves fail to report or underreported wastewater production. And this is problematic because the wastewater includes all of those same harmful elements. And by failing to account for wastewater, we're really underestimating the amount of nitrogen that might be entering the waterways. So we found that only two of the five regions actually mandate wastewater production reporting.
Great. Thank you. I think we have a question in the chat. So just talking about California's regulation, the question is, how does it compare with other countries, maybe also other states? Is it sort of more or less effective? I know Maryland has been something that you've looked at specifically. So yeah, would love to hear your thoughts on that, Zoe.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I unfortunately can't provide a full answer for specifically tracking wastewater and manure, but I can answer a more complete answer about sort of other states' regulation of calves more generally. So for a different report that we were working on, we were comparing how Maryland versus California managed antibiotic resistance in animal agriculture. So as a reminder, antibiotic resistance emerges in industrial animal agriculture because the way that we apply antibiotics to animals. So, wherein in humans, we really only give antibiotics for short periods of time and in really high doses to treat infections and knock out those bacteria really quickly. And animals, we give antibiotics, what I would call over a low and slow period. So, a long period of time, low doses, in order to prevent infections and prevent animals from being sick from the really crowded, dirty conditions of industrial animal agriculture. And this is all helpful context because essentially, California doesn't regulate antibiotic resistance that emerges from calves really well. They allow producers to continue to give antibiotics to their animals, even when these antibiotics are used for important, human medicine purposes, or the antibiotics are only used to prevent disease rather than to treat it. Maryland, in contrast, has a much more comprehensive regulatory scheme that prevents the use of medically important antibiotics to prevent disease emergence in animals. So essentially, what I'm trying to say here is that California sort of allows a lot of loopholes and has a looser regulatory system for calves than other states have in sort of similar regulatory areas. So we can see that antibiotic resistance is managed more poorly in California, which might say something more broadly about their regulation of air and water pollution also by calves.
Great. Thank you. We have a question about engaging with the regional boards. So one question is just how we shared these results with the regional boards, and if so, what is their thinking in response?
Yeah, absolutely. I might have Amanda respond to this one as well, but the regional boards actually came to us. They had seen the white paper and wanted to speak a little bit about their perspective on it. And I think that they expressed to us that it's a really difficult problem that they're navigating because they have relatively few resources in order to control large numbers of calves. In our perspective, and or maybe I'm only speaking for myself here, I think it is a really difficult problem. But it seems like because California has the most dairies in the country, and these dairies have the capacity to do a lot of environmental and other forms of harm, we should be dedicating a lot of the state's resources to ensuring that there's adequate monitoring. So they were telling us that soon they're going to be releasing the dairy order. They said any day now. That was a couple weeks ago. So we're hoping that it comes out pretty soon and that it's responsive to some of these concerns.
Great. Thank you, Zoe. Um, One other question that was posed in the chat, where do you think the missing manure in wastewater is ending up?
Yes, that's a fantastic question. So we think it's probably going a couple of places. So one thing that isn't included on annual reporting forms is whether facilities are placing their manure or wastewater into manure lagoons. And so manure lagoons are these deep pits, literally of poop, that generate huge amounts of methane emissions and can be really harmful. Like people have fallen into these pits and died. So it's possible that some of the manure is going there. What we think is happening potentially as well is that farms are applying more nitrogen than they say that they are to their fields. So I can explain this a little bit. So Region 5 places limits on the amount of nitrogen that can be applied to their fields in their waste discharge requirement. Specifically, they say that the applied to removed ratio of nitrogen should be 1.4 or below, and you can start facing penalties if it reaches 1.65. And from our report, you can look in the white paper, we see that a lot of facilities tend to stack up sort of close to this 1.4 number. So they're just below what would be permitted. And we think that it's possible that the farms are actually applying more manure than they say that they are so that they can fall below this threshold and sort of evade any sort of regulatory price for what they're doing. So those are sort of our two theses right now for where that's going.
Great. Thanks, Zoe. We have a kind of a related question. Have we had the opportunity to talk to any local stakeholders and get an idea of whether these sort of discrepancies or emissions are sort of more on the obfuscation side or just a matter of sort of taking the easier path in filling out these forms?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So it's hard to say because I had the privilege of going to Pixley, which is a Central Valley community, last year, which is particularly affected by nitrogen contamination in water. The families that live there actually can't use water from their tap and instead have to rely on purchasing water for drinking. And from their perspective, if I recall it correctly, they felt like the harms of the farming and particularly of the manure were sort of being obfuscated, especially because a lot of the dairies have sort of controlling economic force in the regions. And then those dairies, of course, benefit from underestimating the amount of waste that they produce, saying that they're not applying a lot of it to land. But we know empirically that something's going wrong, right? The state board themselves, part of the reason that they initiated that new draft dairy order is because they recognize that they're producing too much nitrogen, that there's too much nitrate in the groundwater. So we know that there's a big problem. Um, and the annual reports aren't quite reflecting that there's a problem. So there's a pretty big gap there.
Great, thank you. One question I have is sort of what your thoughts are about next steps for this work, and anything you feel that you've learned in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. So confined animal facilities have wide-ranging environmental effects beyond just water quality. In the next stage of our work, we're hoping to coalesce data from other environmental sectors, like from the air side of things, for example. And so right now, our team is actually looking at the intersection of the low carbon fuel standard and water permitting. And so for a little bit of context, the low carbon fuel standard, otherwise known as LCFS, is a program that theoretically reduces methane emissions by financially incentivizing facilities, including CAFs, to produce biogas. My dear friend and a fantastic data scientist, Raja, scraped the publicly available LCFS dataset to extract the names of individual farms that were participating in this LCFS program. And with the help of another wonderful undergrad, we're currently working on cross-referencing the two data sets, so the annual reports and the low carbon fuel standard data, to understand whether facilities participating in the program are responsibly managing their manure. So essentially, we want to see whether the facilities that are benefiting from these subsidies under LCFS are polluting water or if they're participating in the program well. And after that, we're hoping to just have a broader picture of CAF's overall compliance with environmental quality regulations in California, because currently regulation tends to be siloed across the environmental sectors.
Great. Thank you. We have a question about sort of regional boards. The question is there a hope of sort of increasing enforcement by changing the composition of those bar boards? And maybe I'll just add to that as well, if you wanted to elaborate a little bit on your thinking on increasing capacity for the boards in general.
Sure. So, yeah, like we said, right now the regional boards have 7 part-time members, and in Region 5, Central Valley, they are managing over 1,000 confined animal facilities and some of the largest in the state. So it's a really difficult problem that they're tasked with managing. But each of these CAFs is producing 300 plus pages of annual reports. Many of them aren't machine readable. And so it's sort of impossible right now to be able to read this data in any sort of comprehensive way. So, what we're hoping to push for is having annual reports that are more easily machine readable so that one person could be doing the function that we're performing and then actually be able to use the annual reports for what they're worth. They provide really useful compliance data. They can tell us if facilities are over or under producing manure, if they're managing nitrogen appropriately. So that's one of the key regional board enhancements that we're looking at.
Excellent. I'm going to pipe in with one of my own questions again. So communicable disease is always a hot topic. It's a particularly hot topic right now. And you spoke a little bit about your findings related to that, and sort of the ramifications of this work for the spread of disease, via calves. Could you elaborate a little bit on that and speak to that more?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I feel like my expertise is a little bit more cabin to antibiotic resistant infections, but there was recently a really interesting study from the study of Southern California, which found that around 20% of UTIs in that region are attributable to calf manure runoff, which is a pretty staggering finding. And humans are basically able to contract antibiotic resistant infections from calves in a variety of different ways. So they can either get these infections through consuming adulterated animal products, through direct animal contact, through contact with animals' manure in the environment, as we were just discussing, and then through human to human transmission once one person has one of these diseases. And we're worried about this upsurge in potential antibiotic resistance, and we think that this will has the potential to be sort of the next epidemic or pandemic. Around 35,000 people in the United States each year are already dying from antibiotic resistant infections. These aren't all from industrial animal agriculture, but animal agriculture is certainly contributing to the problem. Something I didn't talk about as much in the presentation is that manure also contains a variety of viruses, and with the advent of H5N1. So that was the also known as highly pathogenic avian influenza, HPAI. We've seen that that's been communicated to dairies. And so, actually, a significant portion of the 70 people in the United States who contracted highly pathogenic avian influenza, about 40 of them were individuals who were in contact with sick dairy cows. So, dairies can be really pestilent and convey a lot of different viruses and infections.
Great. Thank you so much, Zoe. Really appreciate you taking all of those questions. I see we're just about at time. Unless there's any final questions to wrap up, I think we'll go ahead and end there. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. I think I mentioned this in the chat, but we'll circulate the recording to those who are able to make it. We really, welcome your questions. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Zoe and I both love to talk about this stuff, so very happy to connect and chat. Please feel free to reach out anytime. And again, thank you for joining us today, and take care.
Yeah, thank you so much again. Sorry, I saw a hand.